When I was running research studies for my doctorate degree, we often used studies that looked at people's unconscious reactions and specifically their unconscious biases. And consistently, across almost every single study, people's initial reaction to something happened within milliseconds, and it was almost always based on their subconscious beliefs. But often, people mistakenly call this their gut instinct. And so, something to consider is, are your gut instincts always things like your intuition, or is it your reactions based on your unconscious conditioning? This is The Self Led Leader. I'm Dr. Christina Ady, and in this show, we explore how your beliefs about who you are and what you're capable of determine the results that you're getting. Every week, we go beyond your skills and strategy to explore the psychology of how you operate and how it's been limiting you so you can finally achieve the goals you didn't think you could. Let's get into today's episode. A lot of what feels natural to you right now isn't necessarily who you are as a person. It's the byproduct of what you've learned and who you have learned to be. So, the way that you think, the habits that you have, and how you describe yourself, it's not random. It has been shaped and molded over time through your environment, your experiences, the roles you've had, and the feedback that you've received. Most of this didn't actually happen consciously. It happened gradually through repetition until it became normal and therefore unconscious to you. And this is important to understand because when I say something feels normal to you, I don't mean that it feels good to you. I mean that it feels familiar, it feels expected, and it feels like, okay, this is just how things are. And it's not even about your comfort zone because you can logically understand that something is unhealthy, something's wrong for you, something is actively working against your goals. And yet, you can still continue to accept the circumstances because they feel normal. And that is exactly the thing about something beginning to feel normal. You just get so used to it that you stop questioning if things can actually be different. So, how does this actually happen in practice? Well, we need to start by considering your social conditioning. Now, social conditioning is the things that you've been taught to believe either about yourself or about how things are done in general. And it works in layers, starting with the influence of your parents, your family, your close friends. Then, layered on, it's also the things that you've been exposed to and the experiences that you have personally had, whether that's through school, through teachers, through previous jobs. And then the final layer on top is the general cultural expectations or the societal norms based on where you live and how you were brought up. Now, here's the interesting thing: everyone has somewhat similar experiences on a societal or cultural level, and often similar experiences on a personal level as well. But it is the unique combination that you experienced and the meaning that you attach to it that formed your personal patterns. So let's go through some examples. If your friends or family always said things to you like, be humble, don't be too much, things like it's important to make a good impression and work hard for what you want. Well, with repetition, this became your personal beliefs and your personal values as well. And these messages, they're not always said directly, even though they often are. But sometimes they're implied. Sometimes they're modeled through others' behaviors, the things that we see others say and do. And sometimes they are actually reinforced by the reactions or the comments that we hear from others. And this is the type of feedback that can influence us. But these beliefs become your inner story too. And here's the important thing to note: your subconscious beliefs will always win. Even if you consciously tell yourself that you don't believe that, you're doing things differently, you're doing things your way. If you still have these beliefs playing out on an unconscious level, then you will continue to feel that tension, that uncertainty, that doubt, and you will question if you're doing things the right way. Because unfortunately, It's not our conscious mind that wins, it's our subconscious mind that drives our initial instincts and reactions. And so it's important to consider, what does this actually mean for you now? Well, let's talk about it. I want you to pause for a minute and just consider, what did you learn that you had to do in order to be accepted by your parents? What about by your friends? And what about by your potential clients? Consider for a moment the behaviors or the beliefs that you learned were acceptable versus inappropriate. What did you learn would make you respected versus would make others uncomfortable? And what did you learn is something worth being rewarded for versus something that's likely to get you judged by others? Now, all of these different pieces combine to make your current personal belief system that has its own caps and its own limits on what is okay or acceptable for you to do versus what feels risky, unsafe, or too different from who you really are. And this is why showing up can feel so uncomfortable, because even when you logically know what you want to say, part of you is still very likely operating from, is this a representation of who I am supposed to be? And like we've already talked about, over time, the patterns that we have, they don't just stay as behaviors. They become part of how we see ourselves. They form our identity. So you might start to think things like, well, I'm just not someone who's naturally confident, or I'm more of a thinker, I'm more of a writer than a speaker. Or even, I'm still figuring things out. And the question that I want you to really sit with is, how much of that is actually you? And how much of this is you being stuck in the loop of what you have learned? You were operating within a very specific set of expectations: when to speak, how to present your ideas, what makes you credible, what makes you professional. Those rules made sense in that environment. They worked. Yes, they got you to where you wanted to go, or at least they helped you get partially there. But same rules no longer apply. In fact, sometimes they actively work against you. And this is exactly why you can feel confident and capable in one aspect and then become completely uncertain and hesitant in another aspect. Maybe you love writing because it gives you time to perfect your thoughts in a way that reflects who you've been taught to be and keeps you within the constraints of how you think you should show up. And so I know for me, my whole life, I was told to work hard and to get a good job in a reputable profession. My dad used to even call me professor as a nickname when I was a kid. And so when I started my coaching business, I actually felt ashamed. I knew my work was meaningful, but I was so terrified that the people that I knew, especially in my academic background, would see me and would judge me for becoming a coach, especially because I heard comments like, are you sure you're not wasting your PhD by not going into corporate? And so behind the scenes, I was working so incredibly hard, but I still struggled with visibility in my business. And that's the thing. Underneath all of this, there is another layer. It's not just about your social conditioning. It's also about your personal internal standard for what feels allowed for you. Questions like, how visible am I actually allowed to be? How directly am I allowed to speak to people without coming across as, rude? How confident am I allowed to come across without seeming like I've become conceited? And each one of you will have a completely different answer. But your answer is what defines what is acceptable for you. So even if you consciously want more, your belief system will continue to keep you within what feels acceptable, within the range that you have set. That is exactly why we always notice the missed opportunities that we didn't take. They are a direct reflection of the gap between who we want to be and how we think we should be doing things. So, When you look at your patterns now, you can start to see how your patterns have become your identity. The overthinking, the hesitation, the inconsistency, they're not random and they're not a flaw that you have. They are the direct result of what you learned was acceptable, what you learned was expected of you, what you learned about who you need to be, and the values that you're supposed to have. So now at this point, it's not about blaming anyone in the past. Moving forward, it is now about understanding the system that you personally are currently operating. Because the more clearly you can see what has shaped your patterns in the past, the easier it becomes to change how you respond. So, anytime you feel that uncertainty, you start to second guess yourself, you feel frustrated that you're not living up to your own expectations for yourself, just notice what rule is running the show in that moment. Because it's when you start to notice it in real time and you understand exactly what's happening and why, that is how you begin to change it by taking new actions that actually stick. I hope you're seeing how the pieces are all coming together. And if this has been helpful, if this is something that you'd like to go deeper into, understanding who you are as a leader, how you currently show up, and how your psychology is such a driving part of that, and understanding how to improve your executive presence while overcoming your own self doubt, I'll link the information in the description. And I'll see you in the next episode. Take care. Bye.